Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Digital Dice podcast. I am Dave.
I'm Ron.
And Ron, this is episode 134 today.
A super triple XL version of Digital Dice.
It is. I think this is our longest show ever. This is an interview we did with J. Thomas Hetrick. He wrote the book Misfits, baseball's worst ever team. It's about the Cleveland Spiders, and you guys all know I'm playing a whole bunch of Cleveland Spiders baseball from 1899, Ron. 1899.
Party like it's 1899 there, Dave.
I wonder how you did party in 1899.
Well, apparently, from what you're about to hear, those Victorian chicks, they just didn't dig the long ball.
Yeah, and they didn't dig the long ball, and there was a lot of the games got over early, so there was a lot of perusing at the local establishments too.
I hear some malaria calling me.
Yeah, so we had a great interview with J. Thomas Hetrick, the author of the book. There, I'd say we hit it out of the park. Yeah, we hit it out of the park. Okay. So, yeah, we talked to him for quite some time. We were actually live on YouTube, so this is taken directly from that conversation we had with him. We asked him a lot of questions. We had a question from the chat room. We had a question from our Patreon members, and we had a bunch of questions from ourselves. And I tell you, by the end of it, we learned a lot about the Spiders. We learned a lot about turn-of-the-century baseball. It was just story after story.
Yes.
Of how different baseball was back then and some of the funny stories that he told and things that were happening back then. So, if you like baseball, if you're a baseball fan, you're going to love this interview. It really is. Ways to get a hold of us. DigitalToDice.com is the website where we park all the shows over on Spreaker. 978-751-DICE is the Dice line. Send us a text, 978-751-3423. Our email, digitaltodice@yahoo.com. And our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/digital2dice. So, without further ado, let's get to our interview. Hey, folks, we are live here on Saturday night, May 7th of 2022. I'm joined by Ron. Ron, how you feeling, by the way?
Much better, thank you.
All righty. So you spent 2 weeks getting over COVID, but you're doing better now.
Yeah.
So he's doing better.
I'm here.
And joining us on the Dice line is our guest. It is author J. Thomas Hetrick. He has written the book Misfits, baseball's worst ever team, about the 1899 Cleveland Spiders. Yes, you guys know I play a lot of Cleveland Spiders. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right. Now, before we get to the book, we do have one question that we like to ask all of our guests. And that question is, if you could go back in time to any sporting event, what sporting event would that be?
Well, I will pick out one of the games, the early games of the 1971 World Series. That would be Roberto Clemente in right field, throwing missiles to the catcher and to the third baseman and stunning the Memorial Stadium crowd in Baltimore with his almost ridiculous baseball talent.
It's one of the few ever in strike.
That's what I would like to see.
Ron, do you know that game, Ron?
He made the greatest throw I've ever seen in probably 55 years.
Really?
Of baseball. A one-hopper to Richie Hebner at third that froze the runner, and he did it with his back turned in right field. He'd never even been in Memorial Stadium. He played the carom perfectly off the 309 wall, and he threw a bullet. And you can see it on YouTube somewhere, somehow. It's just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
That's not the one from This Week in Baseball that they always show, is it?
No, they've been too early for that.
Yeah, I think those ones were a little bit older than that. But, yeah, he could do stuff like that.
I was in utero for that series, Dave. I came about a month later. But no, I mean, there's a reason why Clemente was a -6 arm in right field a few years in Strat, and his capability of doing that certainly is one of the reasons why I remember. He did that late in his career, too. He wasn't just some 22, 23-year-old kid.
That was his second to last year in the majors. He was 36 years old.
Yeah.
He did that.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, the only arm I've seen remotely close is Ichiro.
Pretty good one.
Yeah, but not Clemente for sure. But yeah, that's about the only comparison. So
you wrote a book called Misfits, baseball's worst ever team. It is about the 1899 Cleveland Spiders. So let's ask you, whatever made you write a book about the 1899 Cleveland Spiders?
Well, you got to back up to 1969 first.
Okay.
I was friends with this young man named Tim Kulik. I was about 12 years old. We lived in Falls Church, Virginia. We were both burgeoning baseball fans. He was a fan of the Detroit Tigers, especially Norman Cash. I was a fan at that time of the Washington Senators. That was the local team. And we had heard about a brand new computer-generated book coming out called the Macmillan Baseball Encyclopedia. And we went down to a local mall, and it cost us, we had to beg, borrow, and steal. We're just kids, of course, from our parents to get $15 together. It retailed for $25, but it was on sale for $15. We plopped down our money. We took this brand new book home, and we literally spent hour after hour after hour looking at all the stats. And I mean, there's no text in it really, just stats. And I saw this one entry for 1899 Cleveland. It did not make sense at all to me. And that stuck in my mind for many, many years. How could a team win 20 games and lose 134? It doesn't even seem possible. As Earl Weaver once said, you know, when you play a baseball season, you play 162 games. You're going to win 54. You're going to lose 54. And then it's that other 54 that makes the difference. Well, obviously, Earl Weaver didn't apply that logic, or the Spiders didn't recognize that logic. But anyway, so what happened was many, many years later, I joined the Society for American Baseball Research. And as one of the projects that I picked first was this team to try to figure out what was their story for Congress. And that's how it all started.
Okay.
To start the research for the book.
Now, maybe for not everyone who watches or listens is going to understand what SABR is. So maybe if you can just take a second to explain what that is. So
yes, SABR is the Society for American Baseball Research, SABR. It is comprised of approximately 7,000 to 8,000 members worldwide, mostly in North America. These are super fans, statistical nerds, people that are really curious about ball games, love ball games in all of their forms. They have regular chapter meetings. They have regional chapters and national chapter meetings once a year. This year it'll be in Baltimore, Maryland. So that will be a lot of fun.
You said the magic word because the fire truck just went by. So, and actually, the word sabermetrics comes from SABR.
Correct. So. And we know that Elias and Major League Baseball use SABR extensively in their media presentations. So that's a good thing. And now it started way back in 1971. So it is getting on in years. It's over 50 years old now. And this will be the 50th convention. Last year's was wiped out due to COVID.
There's nothing wrong with being nothing wrong with being 50. I can tell you that firsthand. So go back. So you're reading the Macmillan Encyclopedia and you see that. And obviously, what else intrigued you to want to research it, despite the fact that they made the 62 Mets look like winners? Greedy.
Well, it just so happened that the year before, the Baltimore Orioles, I keep bringing up Baltimore, don't I? But they went through a 21-game losing streak to start the season. Right. And everybody was talking about that in the media. Is that the record? Is that the this? Is that the that? And poor Frank Robinson inherited the team from Cal Ripken's father.
Yeah, 1988, yeah.
It was 1988. And so the research pretty much commenced after that, after I was trying to basically disprove the fact that the Orioles were the worst team ever. They weren't even close. So that was a big part of that spurred me on to greater heights.
And of course, the Orioles would go on the next year and take the Blue Jays to the last weekend of the season.
That's right.
So, okay.
Right. And at that time, I was a big Orioles fan because I was living in Washington, but still, that was our you kind of held your nose and became an Orioles fan for several years, waiting for what has happened now with the Nationals coming from Montreal.
2019 was a great year.
Correct.
Okay, so
it was a spectacular year.
So you start thinking about writing this book, 1899. How long did it take to do the research for this book? And where would you even begin to find things on 1899? Like how difficult was this?
Well, it was fairly simple once I got my sea legs and figured out what the story was. So I knew what the ending was, and I knew what the start was, but I didn't know all the meat in between. So what I did is I decided that the only way to get the true story is to get the period newspapers, which I did at the Library of Congress. So I basically photocopied with these very old microfilm readers and printers all of the newspapers from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Cleveland Press, the Sporting News, Sporting Life, and the papers where they were playing, the out-of-town papers as well. I cobbled them all together, and as each day went by, each day in the calendar year went by, I read all of that material, and then I wrote the text for that one day. So I did not know what was going to happen the next day.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I did not know. So the chronology, it's a chronology story day by day. And I thought this was the best method because, there were no preconceived notions other than the fact that they're going to lose a whole lot of games. I didn't know about the players. I didn't know anything. And so as it went along, I found out that using period newspaper language was also very important, very colorful, very strange compared to today, as Dave would probably note. One of the great passages that I remembered back from that time period occurred from a gentleman named Tommy Tucker. He was the first baseman. Tommy Tucker was a loudmouth. He coached when he wasn't playing first base sometimes, and he would fight at the drop of a hat. He would fight anybody and anytime, anywhere. And Tommy Tucker, one time there was a call that went against the Spiders, and he kicked some dirt on the umpire, and the newspaper quote said, "Tommy Tucker got gay with the umpire." Now, it didn't mean that he had relations with the umpire. That's language of today. It meant that in a sarcastic way, he was quite upset. So those are the kind of things that I noted and placed in the book rather profusely. That kind of sprinkled in that language.
So how long did it take to compile all this?
It took 1 year of research, of solid research to gain the materials, and then it took basically 1 year to write it. So 2 years altogether.
Okay. And how much did it cost? Because obviously there wasn't anything.com back in 1990 to actually go to the Library of Congress and print out that stuff at 10 or 25 cents a page.
It cost probably several $100 at least, not to mention the metro ticket and the fare and all that to get down there.
Yeah.
All my day down there, and then, have to deal with my girlfriend and all that nonsense. So, things are what they are. I spent a lot of time at the library doing this, so.
It must have been like a good continuing saga as this season just gets deeper and deeper in the muck. And, of course, the fact that they don't play a home game for the last pretty much 3/4 of the season and all that. Did the papers at the time know that this team was in trouble? Or how did they write it go off? I mean, because I guess today's comparison would be this year's Reds, which are kind of matching them.
You're right. Well, Dave, if you will hold up the book cover, I will talk about that. Now, You can see that there's guys that have broken legs and broken arms and old men and people with clown shoes. And
I'm going to go solo layout here, so you guys are still with us.
All that type of stuff. That was the cover or the front page of the Cleveland Press on opening day. So they had them figured out from the get-go. And unfortunately, the press is a big part of the story because the press never gave them a chance, not a snowball's chance in hell, as they say. And they played accordingly, if not worse. So that's the answer to that question. The press treated them brutally.
Yeah.
But when you read the book, you sort of start feeling very sorry for them.
I did actually. It's funny you say that because that's exactly how I felt, because I'm reading this book and it's set up. There's a little intro in the beginning setting it up, and then you go day by day or game by game with the Spiders. And when you read about, like, I thought it was funny they lost so many games. I just like the bad teams when I play my games here on the table. And then I read this, like, this wasn't really fair. It's like there was two owners, and they stacked one team, and if you were on the bottom team playing well, they shot you to the other team. So they never had a chance to do anything.
It was called syndicate baseball. So there were two syndicates at the time that were active and legal. They later became illegal. The National League voted them out of existence. But what it meant was there was a gentleman named Frank D. Haas Robeson and his brother M. Stanley. Mr. Robeson owned the Cleveland Spiders in 1898, but he hated the fans' support. He thought the trolley line wasn't doing their job and the fans weren't coming. And you might recall that there was a guy named Cy Young on the team at the time. Also Jesse Burkett, both future Hall of Famers. Mm-hmm. But they didn't draw flies per se in Cleveland. And he decided to pull this maneuver where in March of 99, he bought the St. Louis Browns for a song from in a sort of a bankruptcy sale from the previous owner, Chris Van der Aa, who's the subject of my second book. And he bought it first. I think they bought the team for like $30,000, $33,000 for the entire team. That's ballpark and everything. So what he did is he thought that the St. Louis fans were much more in tune, and he moved the entire Cleveland team to St. Louis and moved the St. Louis team to Cleveland, and the rest is history.
And they would become the Cardinals. Right.
They actually, for that 1 year, they were the Perfectos, and then became the Cardinals. Yes.
Question for one of our
from the start.
Yes, it was. It's very sad how that happened. It was not a funny story. When I get done reading, I was like, that was pretty sad. Question for one of our Patreons, David. He asked, what was the most surprising place you found information during your research?
Well, I think the most surprising place was in Maryland when I gave a talk, my first public speaking event. It would have been in 1991, I think. There was a gentleman that was in contact with me. His name was Harley. Right after the book came out, he emailed me. This is in the nascent days of email. And I talked to him on the phone, and he explained that he was the great-grandson of Dick Harley, the left fielder. And I thought, wow, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And so what happened was I ended up inviting them to this first public speech, which was a Sabre event at a local community college. And I gave the speech, and literally 10 seconds into the speech, unbeknownst to me, a lady jumped up out of the audience and said, screaming, "That's not my father." And I said, "Well, ma'am, this is it's a character. It's a cartoon drawn from a photograph. There's not many photographs of these ball players since they were so obscure." And she went on and on. And I had to basically, think quickly to get her to sit down. And as it turns out, during the break, we met, and they showed us a jersey from 1902, when Dick Harley played for the Detroit Tigers. They had an old flannel jersey. I think that's the most amazing piece of research. I mean, that wasn't technically research, but it certainly was a thing. Now, I don't want to mention her name, but what's even more interesting is that she did not know that I taped that event on a cassette player at the podium. And within a week's time, she sent me a very nasty letter complaining about how I intimated that her father was a drunk.
Oh.
And I never, ever said such a thing. In fact, I praised him because he's the only college graduate of the Cleveland Spiders. He graduated from Georgetown, class of 1896. And baseball in that time, to have a college graduate,
Pretty rare.
That is a real thing. So I went and I lauded him. I took care of the other players, don't get me wrong. But I lauded him specifically. And I was so upset getting this letter that I transcribed the speech and sent it to her. Never heard from her again.
Wow.
So no Harley is listening to that exchange, but that is that's the story.
So after you published the book, did you actually get more, first or second or third or fourth hand anecdotes about the team? I mean, if you had to do a revised edition of the book in the subsequent years?
Not really. I had a lot of people that contacted me. I spoke at several Sabre events in places like Pittsburgh and Boston and Washington and Cincinnati and oh gosh, I don't know how many I went to. And I would speak about the Spiders. St. Louis was another one. And the people that were in the audience were probably larger than people that attend in Spiders games at League Park. I think I had 100 people in a ballroom in St. Louis at the Adams Mark Hotel. And that was probably a really good sized crowd.
We did the
Cleveland ballpark.
We did the calculator calculation for what the attendance was reported on Baseball Reference and divided it by how many games they played. And I think we came up with an average audience of 152 or something like that.
Yeah, that would be for the home games. It was very low. They only had like 6,000 fans for their, I think, 38 or 39 home dates. But they went on the road after June or so, and they had a clause in their contract that they would be paid the last week of the month when they were at home. Unfortunately, they were never at home. So they went like 3 months without being paid, believe it or not. And at the end of the year, they were rather vociferous, as you can imagine, in their protestations. Hey, Mr. Robeson, you've got to pay us. And, well, he did. He tied them over, and then he paid them in full somewhere in the middle of October, late October.
And what would have been the average salary in 1899 for those players?
Okay, the average salary was between $1,500, $2,000 or so. Some of the really top stars, they didn't have any of those, but they could make up to $5,000 a year. This is an enormous amount of money for the time.
I'm about to say, roughly, what would that be today?
I have no idea to calculate that. However, it was enormous compared to the average salary man in America. Playing ball for 6-8 months a year was enormous.
So, we're not talking millions, obviously. Today.
No, certainly not.
Okay.
But they were talking $1,000 a year.
Aside from that one lady, have you heard from any of the descendants of the players after the book was published, or was she the only one?
Well, that family was the only one. I'll think twice about that particular situation again. But no, it was all good. It's all good. It was all an experience to learn that. I guess the moral of the story is if you do write a book about public figures, even sports people, you have to kind of be aware. I am thinking it's 1899. I mean, obviously these guys are all deceased. Well, yes, but their progeny live on.
Yes.
Sometimes that can be a factor. So that was
So I got some questions that are kind of in order as I read the book here. Before we do that, though, let's set the stage here. So it's 1899. You got the owner owned St. Louis and Cleveland. All the best players went to St. Louis. Things weren't going well with Cleveland. What's a typical day for like a baseball player back then? Like, how do they get to the ballparks and things like that? Because obviously there was cars, but not like we have today. In baseball stadiums, they were obviously much different than they are today. So just give us just a couple minutes of like a visual of 1899 baseball.
Okay, well, first of all, there were no stadiums. They were all ballparks. They were all rather rural compared to today. They were made of wood. They didn't have the steel girders that they have today and these big stadiums. They were parks. They didn't really hold more than, if they were standing room only, they could get maybe 10, 11,000. But the average ball game would have two umpires, one behind the plate and one in the infield for the infield and outfield. The players would get to the park by trolley car, generally, or by hack if they had a local taxi, but usually by trolley car. The fans would get to the ballpark by trolley car, and in fact, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the early Brooklyn Dodgers, were the Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers because the fans had to dodge trolleys to get to the stadium or the ballpark, which was across the street on the trolley car tracks. That's how the name Dodgers came about.
Okay.
So now when the ball games actually started, the players weren't quite positioned the way they are today. The umpire stood a little bit further behind, couldn't really see the balls and strikes like they do today. They didn't have all the, the chest protector equipment, and the players didn't have the gloves, the modern gloves, and the catcher's mask. They were rather crude affairs. The catcher would actually put a piece of meat inside the leather. We're talking about raw meat to deaden the ball. The ball players would find some water somewhere or a bucket of water, and they would get some lettuce or some cabbage and dunk it in there and put that on top of their head and then put their cap on. And that would try to ward off some of the effects of the sun.
All wool, by the way, all wool.
Yeah, exactly. They were all wool uniforms. I mean, you can only imagine that uniform that I did see from the Tigers in 1902 was a wool uniform. It really is. It defies belief to be in wool, in a 90-degree day. It really does. If you don't believe that, try it sometime.
Yeah. Now, we did have a question here before we continue on here. After further review with Steve Tower, other than Amazon, is there a place to buy your book that benefits you a little bit more?
You can buy it from www.pocolpress, that's POCOLPRESS.com. And if you send an email to my email address, you can ask for an autograph copy if you're interested in that. I'd be happy to autograph one. I have about 15 or so of those that I could do.
So that's what it is, POCOLpress.com.
P as in Papa, yep. POCOLPRESS.com. And the email address, and this is all one word, it's Chris and Tom, all spelled out, CHRISANDTOM @Arrels.com. That's Echo Romeo Oscar Lima Sierra.com.
Okay.
So yes, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Pocal Press. It does have an ISBN, so you can order it anywhere around the world as well.
Is your email on Pocal Press to contact you?
Yes, that email is the Pocal Press email.
Okay. So that you can pick that up at pocalpress.com and send them an email and tell me you saw them on Digital Dice and you want to get an autographed copy of that. All right, so I just wanted to get that out of the way real quick. The name of the book, VL, is Misfits, Baseball's Worst Ever Team. It's called Misfits, Baseball's Worst Ever Team.
And by the way, if there's people that are confused that know about the first book, it is the same book. The original book, which was published by McFarland, was called Misfits, the Cleveland Spiders in 1899. It is the exact same book, but the paperback version has some different illustrations in it.
Okay.
Now, or less inexpensive than than the original hardcover, which is no longer available, by the way.
Okay. Now, they've renovated League Field where the Spiders played. There's community got together and turned that from a ruin into, I think, a community ballpark, if I'm not mistaken. Have you been there since they've redone it? I mean, you spent all that time researching it. If you have, it must have been a great experience for you to actually troll those grounds.
Actually, I have not been to Cleveland to see that. I have been to Cleveland, but I have not seen that. However, I would say that part of the research that I did was at a minor league stadium in Virginia. What I would do is sit in the stands and take notes about the way the players just moved around. So, the mechanical, shall we say, the physiology of the players, throwing the ball back and forth and hitting the ball and what the catcher does and what the umpire does. So I just kind of took a mental note of how that worked. And I certainly didn't write the book in a ballpark, but I took a bunch of notes as to how the game sort of plays out in even the modern game. There are many, many concepts that are the same that came from that early era. Now,
earlier you mentioned you got the idea to do this around in 1999, which was around the time that the movie Major League came out. And when Dave was describing the story to me about this poor team, that's the visual I got in my head, how the Cleveland Indians of the late 80s got revenge on the owner and said, well, you're going to try to tank this? No, you're not. We're going to win it all. Any type of similar stories with them about, we know that you're trying to sink us off. Let's screw things over and win? Or...
Well, there are some similarities in the sense that what Mr. Robeson did, Frank DeRobeson, he was the older brother, the one with the money, shall we say.
Okay.
And he told his brother M. Stanley, to go ahead and manage. When I say manage, I'm talking about financially manage the Cleveland Spiders. And he said, I don't really care if you win games, just play the schedule. That's all you have to do. And that's what they did. And, it is kind of sad that the players tried as hard as they could. As a matter of fact,
right.
In one of the games, the Sporting News reported, quote, the players are doing the very best they can and only ask the spectators use no firearms. So... The players were all in. They just weren't very good. They weren't very skilled compared to the rest of their National League foes.
Right. All right, I'm going to rip off a bunch of things I saw in the book, and I want you to explain them to me.
Sure.
Clark banged out 4 safeties. What's a safety?
A safety is a base hit. And Clark is Fred Clark, who became a future Hall of Fame baseball player. At that time, he was playing with the Louisville Cardinals. He went over with Honus Wagner to the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Okay.
And you know what the Pirates did in the early part of the century? They were really, really good, along with the Giants and the Cubs. Those were the 3 dominant teams of that early century.
Why so many triples back then compared to modern baseball?
Okay. Good question. So a lot of people talk about triples and home runs, and I think they're very similar in the way it worked. The idea of playing baseball was to place hit the ball and to run the bases like wild men, run as fast as you can. Now, the fences weren't always actual fences. Sometimes they were roped off. So when the player would hit a ball in the gap, the idea was to run as fast as they could, as many bases as they could. And most of the home runs were not hit over the fence. They were actually run homes rather than home runs. So, you hit the ball in the gap and it just rolls and rolls and rolls. And some of these places, like the old Forbes Field, which came later, but, they had an outfield of like 457. So, if the ball's going to roll, you're going to run and you're going to get a triple. And sometimes you're going to get a home run inside the park. That was just a home run. They didn't even inside the park probably wasn't even a concept back then. Just a home run.
Right.
But it was considered sissified to hit the ball over the fence.
Really?
Until Babe Ruth came along. Yeah, things changed when the big fella came along.
Interesting. Okay.
Why was it considered sissified to hit one out of the park? Was it just not considered sporting?
The idea of the game was place hitting and running. That was the athletic competition. It was all about that. If you hit the ball over the fence, that's boring. You get a bunch of runs and that's it. I mean, who cares about that? That did not enter the consciousness until later. So
the lesson from that, Mr. Gardner, is the Victorian chicks did not dig the long ball.
That's right.
All right, another line from the book. Umpire Gaffney was, without his partner, umpired the contest alone. Talk about the umpires.
Oh my! Well, this is one of the most startling parts of any research about 19th century baseball. If you have one umpire active for a game, this is what you have to imagine. You have to imagine a guy behind the plate calling balls and strikes, and when the ball is hit anywhere, he's got to run. He's got to run down the first base line for a ground ball. He's got to run into the outfield for a fly ball. He's got to run down the left field line for a ball hit to the third baseman. He's got to run and run and run. And guess what? People aren't bobbleheads. They can't swivel their head around. So he could not possibly see all of the action, which brings to mind what happened to the Spiders in Louisville. In Louisville, they had actually, it was back in Cleveland, or in the early part of the season. The Louisville story comes later. But in Cleveland, they were playing the Louisville Colonels, then called, and Wagner and Clark were on that team. The Louisville had a catcher by the name of Malachi Kittredge. He was reportedly the slowest runner in the league. And I believe he was on first base, and one of the Louisville players hit a ball into the outfield. Kittredge took off for second base. He turned second and headed for home. I said he headed for home.
Yes.
He did not go to third base. He just cut right through, maybe right through the pitcher's mound for all we know, slid in a hail of dust, and the umpire called him safe. This is in Cleveland. Now, the Cleveland fans, as few as they were, they protested rather strongly, as Shakespeare once said. She protested too much. Well, anyway, the Cleveland fans went completely bananas. Tommy Tucker went crazy. Joe Sugden, the catcher, went crazy. They all went absolutely bonkers. There's one umpire, and he's called this guy safe. Well, they're complaining, well, the guy didn't even go to third base. So what did the umpires do back in the day? They would go into the stands and they would ask. Right? Now, the Cleveland fans were saying, no. You didn't even go to third base, Mr. Umpire, but guess who won the day? You talk about bad luck. The Spiders would lose games like that. And by the way, that was the winning run in the bottom of the ninth. I think the bottom of the ninth. So, they lost a game on a dash from second.
Wow.
Bypassing third altogether. Now, the other incident occurred in Louisville. This one is just as bizarre and just as tough luck for the Spiders. Louisville, the night before, had an electrical fire. And back in the day, when all the ballparks were made of wood, they had frequent fires in the grandstand. They had a fire that burned much of the right field line down the first base side. And when the fans came into the park the next day, they couldn't sit there. So Louisville management had them sit on the periphery, behind first base, but, kind of sort of bleeding into what we now call the foul line. They didn't have the codified, lines that we would have today, the chalk and all the measurements and all the precision. So these fans actually started to creep into the outfield. And I want to read to you the actual words from the Louisville Courier-Journal about this particular play. So so that's the setup. Now, there was a batter up to bat for Louisville named Claude Richie, the second baseman. He was a pretty decent ball player. He hit a ball into the right field, into right field. And I'm going to read you exactly what the Louisville Courier-Journal wrote about that particular incident. Richie hit an ordinary double along the right field line. It rolled into the crowd seated on the grass near the fence, and some big fat man sat down on it. He refused to get up until Richie had made a circuit of the bases. It was certainly a peculiar home run.
Yes.
So that stood as a home run. You could look that up in your official record books, Mac and all the other encyclopedias. That's the fat man home run. So, if you're a guy and you're a Louisville fan, you just sit on the ball. I mean, the outfielder couldn't get it. He's certainly not going to reach underneath the guy's derriere to try to pull the ball out and throw it in. So,
Who knew
that happened?
Was a Louisville fan, huh?
That happened.
So let's go.
There were just a series of those type of things that would happen to the Spiders. Lots of bad luck, and it almost seemed to fait accompli after a while.
So let's go through some of the rules of 1899 that may or may not be different from today. 4 balls, 3 strikes.
You know what? I just got done with, from the group of SABR members in Cooperstown, and it seemed to change dramatically year after year, especially from the late 1880s into the 90s. At one time it was 9 balls, and then it was like 7 balls, and I believe it was 4 balls and 3 strikes in 1899.
Okay.
I believe it was
60 feet 6 between the pitcher's mound and home.
I believe it was 60 feet 6 because I think that changed right around 1893-ish. And they also, they used to have all these different rules where the pitcher had to actually hold the ball up for the umpire and the batter. And then he could do like this little skip and a jump. And it was the pitcher's box rather than the mound and all these other kinds of things. So you could read about that in a book called Strike 4 about the evolution of the rules in baseball. An excellent book by Richard Hirschberger. Let me give a shout out to Richard. But anyway, a lot of those rules were codified during the period of the 80s and 90s to where they are now.
Then 90 feet between the bases, similar.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Obviously, there wasn't any such thing as ground rules, just based on that story that you said, because if someone could sit on the ball and get a home run, were there changes made because of that incident, such as stadium ground or field ballpark ground rules, or not?
Well, if you think of baseball today, of what we see today, everything today looks sterilized and completely codified.
Well, compared to that, yeah,
compared to this. And during this time, believe it or not, in the 1880s, late 1880s, if I could give a plug to my other book, there was an owner named Chris Vander with the St. Louis Browns, and one time a ball was hit over what we call today the foul line or the foul pole. Really, it's the fair pole, but
right.
But the ball was hit, and the players couldn't make a determination whether it was fair or foul. And of course, depending on what team you were on, you would argue vociferously against the umpire. Well, Vander didn't know a whole lot about baseball. And he went out on the field, and with his, German English accent, he said, "What's knocked is knocked. Go ahead, mit der game." So he was basically saying, just go ahead and play the game. But what he didn't understand was, well, you have to make a ruling on the particular play previous before you could continue with the game. But that's how chaotic it was. It was insane compared to what we see, this very sterilized, very time-tested version of baseball today.
And that brings me to April 30th, okay, because I'm kind of going in order as I read the book because it goes day by day. April 30th, there were no umpires. The players had to ump. That's a true story, right?
Yes. So every once in a while, on the rarest of occasion, both umpires would get sick or miss a train or something like that, and they would designate a player to be an umpire, well, I'm just going to let you imagine what chaos would ensue from that.
Oh my goodness gracious!
They tried to be impartial, but come on.
Yeah.
I mean, with all the other things I've told you, that didn't work all that well. But they did actually play major league games without umpires.
That is
Not
crazy.
many, but a few.
Yeah, that happened. Huh? Okay. Lave Cross's argument over Harry Wolverton taking a base on a hit batsman led to his being denied to bat in the 7th by the umpire. What does that mean?
Well, that means he was thrown out of the game before he could get to bat. Just like today, if you argue too much or say certain things, balls and strikes, argue those, you can be thrown out of the game. Players would frequently be thrown out of the game for things like arguing, anything. But it was, if you were thrown out of the game, or if you used foul language, you were going to be thrown out and fined $5.
That was the fine, $5.
That was the standard fine, $5.
A lot of money maybe not back then. So,
all right. So I read a lot in the book about the Spiders being cheered in stadiums while on the road.
Well, again, they weren't stadiums. We'll call them parks.
Ballparks, okay. But I read a lot in there how they were in Louisville or wherever, and they were getting cheered by the home team while on the road.
Right. And because they were an automatic victory for the home team. If you went to see your home team, Boston Bean Eaters, or your New York Giants, or whoever you're seeing, hey, here's your patsy. They're here today, so let's beat them up for the whole series. And if they win, shocker, there was a guy named McGee who played for 3 different teams. He pitched for 3 different teams in 1899 and lost 3 times to the Cleveland Spiders with each team. Think about that.
Oh, wow.
And he promptly changed his name to Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he went further in baseball beyond that, but yeah.
Wow, he lost 3 times to 3. That's a stat you don't want to have, let me tell you.
Anthony Young would be impressed with that. What time of the day did those games get played? Obviously, newspapers an all-day thing back then. So it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was probably probable that if you played in the afternoon, that the evening paper would have the box score or description of the game, or people have to wait till the morning.
I think you waited to the morning. The games did start at 2. They all started at 2 local time. And, they would finish by 3:30 at the latest. And every once in a while, there would be an extra inning game. And they would call the game early because, quote, the Spiders had to catch a train.
Yeah.
The Spiders had to catch a train. There was a lot of those. So you play a 6-inning game, and then you have to catch a train, for crying out loud.
That was one of the things I had in the games call because they needed to catch a train. And both teams were okay with that. It's like, okay, time to go.
Both teams were okay with it. It was standard practice.
No charters.
So I'm
no charters.
I'm trying to picture 1899, life in 1899, with a baseball game at 2:00. How are you going to draw crowds at 2 in the afternoon in 1899?
Okay, that's a really good question, and that's a difficult subject to answer unless you go through the blue laws and understand the restrictions on living in that part of the century in America with the religious restrictions. You couldn't go to the bars, you couldn't work, you couldn't do all these things. So families would get together generally on a Sunday, and they would, in their parlor, if they were rich enough to have a piano, they would get together and they would sing, and they would have roast beef or something. But the average fan could not get to weekday games. Now, largely men, right? But they're working most of the time. So weekend games were very, very important, especially Sunday games. And by 1899, most of the Sunday, the blue laws did not apply, and they did play Sunday baseball. So it was very, very important to have that gate on Sunday. Remember, back in those days, there is one revenue source, and that is your butt in that seat. That's it. There's no baseball cards. There's no cable television. There's no, memorabilia. There's no swag. There's all those pennants you have behind you. None of that stuff existed. The only way they could gather money as an owner is to have your butt in the seat and then maybe make some money from the sale of beer or hot dogs or so, or some concession. It's not like they had big parking lots and things like that. None of that existed.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I'm reading here on June 24th, there was a crowd of 300. So that must have been one of the biggest crowds of the year in Cleveland, 300.
Right.
And then I'm reading July 9th, there was 11,000 fans, and there was an area roped off and ground rule home runs. What the ground rule home runs?
The home runs back in the day did not necessarily have to clear the fence on the fly. Sometimes they could just go and go and go and worm their way into these crowds, and that would be called a home run. As a matter of fact, their backup catcher who joined the team late in the year, a guy named Jim Duncan, he hit 2 home runs late in the season, one of them just like that, and they called him Home Run Duncan.
So you didn't have to clear, you just hit it and just went into the crowd, and that was it, home run, right?
If that's what the teams agreed to before the game, yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. How long was the average game? I was reading about 105 minutes. That's an hour and a half. Is that about right for a game?
Yeah, I said that earlier, just a few minutes ago. The average game, they would be done about 3:30-ish, and the players were notorious drinkers, and they would go to the bar and, they would wench at night. The life of a ball player was not very complicated. You play ball by day, and you carouse by night. And believe it or not, the early days, the two of the main entertainments in America were considered extremely lowbrow entertainment. Can you guess which ones they are? I mean, where today they're considered very exalted forms of entertainment, where Americans will shell out tremendous amounts of money to see these types of entertainment. But back in those days, it was considered really, really kind of the bottom of the barrel thing to do.
Is it the event that ran about an hour ago, horse racing?
No, it's not horse racing.
Okay.
Horse racing was extremely popular at that time. And the Kentucky Derby goes back to 1875, by the way.
Right.
So must be some kind of dancing or something? Some kind of dancing?
It's the theater. You're close. It's the theater. So sports and the theater were considered like the lowest of the low, right?
Wow.
I mean, the hoi polloi would attend these events, but the rich cats, no. You're not going to see Andrew Carnegie taking in a Pittsburgh Pirates game. Not going to happen.
Wow.
Now, I'm sure someone's going to come back and say, oh, Andrew Carnegie used to go and see Honus Wagner. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But the average rich man did not participate in baseball entertainment.
So we get to July 15th of 1899, and they started moving games out of Cleveland. So Cleveland's got to play their games on the road. Talk a little bit about that. Why did Cleveland have to stop playing some home games?
Well, they pretty much had to stop playing all their home games, because what was happening was these crowds, they resembled, as some of the newspapers said, funeral processions, gawkers. When they won a game, it was a religious miracle, things like that. So people showed up or did not show up in droves. I mean, nobody would go to the games. And back in those days, the gate was the number one way to recoup money to pay salaries. So, hey, the owners, Mr. Robeson and his son, figured we can't make money in Cleveland. We got to take this show on the road. And they were actually quite successful away from Cleveland financially, not only for themselves, but for the other teams.
How much
they didn't get paid.
How much of the visitors gate do the visitors get?
Okay, they argued over this for years on end, and I think even in this year they were continually having executive plans about, how much the gate was. I think it was 60-40 at one time, and,
wow.
50, 50, 60-40 for the home team.
Right.
It wavered depending on the time frame. So I can't answer precisely, but, that was yet another of the uncodified, unspecified things that they would constantly harangue over.
Were there any league rule changes after this season to try to give teams a better chance at home as a direct result of what happened with the Spiders?
Right. The syndicate baseball idea was scrapped. So not only was Cleveland and St. Louis a syndicate, but Baltimore and Brooklyn were a syndicate. If you know anything about those mid-1890s Orioles teams, they were pretty wily. They did some incredible, tricky plays to win games. They would hide balls in the outfield, for example. They wouldn't mow the grass deliberately. And so the Oriole outfielders would hide a ball, and then if a ball was hit out to them, they would sometimes surreptitiously sneak over to the hidden ball, pick that up, and able to throw it in, and, of course, completely surprise the runner. Well, that plan worked great. The Orioles were a great team, except one time, 2 balls came into the infield. There's some kind of trickery going on. We got to stop this. So when 2 balls come in, that's not a good thing.
That was great. Here's one of my...
Those are the kind of thing, but there were constant cheating activities going on, shall we say. You grab the belt loop of the runner at third base on a sacrifice fly. The third baseman would grab the belt loop to try to prevent the runner from getting that quick jump. Of course, the guy would break away from that, but that extra fraction of a second might make the difference. They would, there's rumors about Ty Cobb sharpening spikes. I don't know if that's true, but there was a lot of things that were going on in the infield and in the outfield to, just to make it difficult for the opposition to do things. They would deaden the ball too. They would
really?
On occasion they would put the ball on ice, and if you were playing in a certain ballpark, obviously if you're playing at home, you could maybe get away with this. But when you were pitching, your home team was pitching, you would have the ice ball. And of course, when the other team came at bat, or when your team came to bat, they would have the regular ball. So they had all kinds of things they were doing to try to cheat, to try to gain an advantage.
One of my favorites.
Like today.
One of my favorite stories. August 5th. Police arrested a bleacherite who failed to return a foul ball.
Yes.
I love it.
Believe it or not, it wasn't until like the 1920s and a famous court case that foul balls were allowed legally to be kept. It was a thing when the ball went into the stands, you throw it back. You just throw it back. That's just the way it goes. They didn't have, I don't know exactly the number of Major League Baseballs that are available today, but it is in the dozens. I mean, and it's embarrassment of riches, really. I think it's like 5 dozen or something like that.
Oh, easily.
Every time there's a ball in the dirt, they throw a new ball back in. No, not back in those days. That ball would last the whole game. It would be scuffed up. It would get dirty. It would be dark. It would be harder to see, when there was a shadow coming in. So, the balls were not the same as these pristine baseballs they use today. And they were valuable. They had to have these balls.
Yeah.
Available.
How prevalent was gambling or fixing games? You're talking about the money and talking about not getting paid for 3 months. I mean, was that ever an issue with this team?
The gambling was extremely prevalent. It was prevalent in the stands for every pitch. It was prevalent among policemen that were supposed to be watching out for it, that were in the stands. Sometimes they were cooperating with the fans to gamble, or with the cranks, as they sometimes called them. The players would gamble on their own team, on the opposition. this was a normal practice. It was tried to keep under wraps a little bit by the league, but it was almost impossible.
Now, you said that people come in and gambled for an inning or two and leave?
Well, if you think about a lot of sports, I mean, now today we have a completely different thing now with Las Vegas and legalized gambling with sports, especially in football, baseball, basketball. I don't know if they're doing it in hockey, but, you know, if you're gambling and you're a gambler, you're going to go to where the gambling is, period. And if you go to a baseball park, you might not care one whit about the game. You just want to see a few pitches and you want to bring home some shekels. That's just the way it is.
All righty. September 2nd, and we're going to get some questions in the chat room in 1 second. I got a couple more things about the book I want to talk about, then we'll get to the chat room. So if you're posting questions, we will get to your questions. September 2nd, the Spiders played an amateur team. What was up with that?
Well, it was frequent that major league teams would play in-season exhibitions. That was a fairly common thing. They would play sometimes, in the case of Cleveland, they might play, their in-state rival Cincinnati. They might play them for what they called a non-championship game. They would play teams, maybe high school teams or other amateur teams. They would do that for recreation or just to stay loose on their day off. But you have to think about the compensation, and I'm not so sure how that worked. But, if you're a semi-pro team or if you're a high school team, they would be honored to play a major league team, regardless of the fact they were the Cleveland Spiders or something like that. But that would be quite a thing to hang your hat on, that they played with professionals. So they would play these from time to time, and they would be a source of pride for the local community.
Okay. September 3rd, the next day, there was a triangular doubleheader. What is a triangular doubleheader?
That's when you have three teams play two games against each other. So imagine Cleveland would play, let's say Cincinnati and Philadelphia. And then, Philadelphia has already played Cleveland. So they would play, they would all play sort of like a round robin, but they would play each other in one day. Okay. Pretty crazy. Would never happen today.
Another thing I saw in the book is that when they started releasing players were giving a 10-day notice, and yet they still had to play for the team. How do you play for the team when you've been cut?
Well, the classic example of that happened that year was Tommy Tucker. Now it was a frequent thing to, maybe because of the finances of the era, to give a guy a 10-day notice of release. He would still be with the club and able to play for those 10 days. But after that time, he was gone. He was cut. He was out of baseball unless another team signed him. And Tommy Tucker was an example of a real hot-headed player. And I think during, the 10th day, he knew he was basically done. And by the way, this was his end of his major league career. They were going to let him go, and there was a ball hit down to him in a crucial moment in the game, and he just screwed it up on purpose. They lost the game.
Whoops.
Was there anyone
to lose?
Anyone of note that might have played themselves back on the team? I mean, if you got 10 days, hey, what happens if you go on a 4-10 clip or something like that?
I don't think so, because I mean, if you think about, most of these releases would take place. Actually, they took place during the year, but every once in a while there would be a player that could catch on with another team, but it was a death sentence. Generally, you were released.
All right. One other thing I have here before there's
no minor league system, so it's not
back then. No.
Right. It's not like they could be recycled and sort of retrained back into the minors. So.
I saw something about players running for batters. What does that mean?
Well, if you remember your league softball tournament, perhaps they still do this today. They would have a guy that would bat but couldn't run, and they would have sort of a pinch runner that would, stand near the batter's box and run for the base hit or run for when the ball was struck. Again, many of the rules were not codified. If you had a sort of a gentleman's agreement ahead of time, we got this guy, he's got a Charlie horse, he's got this and that. Frequently, the word malaria was the code word for a drunken binge. The guy was on a bender, so they would say he had malaria. Well, there was a lot of guys with malaria for the year. And, when you read a lot about 19th century baseball, you can sort of get into these codes. And if you read some of the books by David Nemec, who's an expert on the topic, shout out to Dave, wherever he is. I think he's in California these days. But a lot of these codes he would have written about as well.
Interesting.
It's amazing the malaria in New York City in 1899. Those mosquitoes were terrible.
All right,
right. We usually think of malaria back with Walter Reed and the building of the Panama Canal.
Right.
Yes, not necessarily, at McGillicuddy's at 5:00 on a Friday afternoon.
Right.
All right, so we're going to get some of the questions here. They've been piling up here. We're going to ask a few of them here. VL asks, how much were tickets?
Good question.
Easy.
Tickets were 50 cents.
That was from
In 1899, tickets were about 50 cents.
Okay.
You go to a game, 50 for a beer. The beers were in glasses, and you heard the phrase, kill the umpire. Yeah, they'd just throw the glass on the field.
Oh, gee. Wow.
Not only are you taking your life in your own hands when you're a single umpire, but then you had to deal with the fans who were quite vociferous on occasion.
I can imagine back then. Yeah. Why did they choose the name Spiders in the first place?
Well, supposedly the story goes that they looked like they had gangly arms and legs, and somebody called them the Spiders, and that's how a lot of baseball nicknames actually came about. A lady went to see the Cardinals one time in 1900 and said, "Look at their uniforms; they're a lovely shade of cardinal." It had nothing to do with the bird, the story goes, and they became the Cardinals from then on. The Pittsburgh Pirates, how did they get their name in 1890? They kept kiping players from other teams. They kept pirating players.
Pirating players.
So they became the Pirates.
So just in case
people... those names came about is, weird things like the Dodgers that I've already explained and, things like that.
But these weren't official nicknames. They were granted nicknames, just like you. I mean, the team didn't call themselves, at least initially, or were they calling themselves the Spiders?
They called themselves unofficially several names. Okay. And then they started to get to the point where they were going to be, have an official name.
Okay.
But the Pittsburgh were the Pittsburgh Alleghenies and the Pittsburgh Stogies, and, the Chicago was the Chicago Orphans.
Yeah.
That's how that came about. I have no...
I'm delighted that Boston did not keep the name Bean Eaters, for example.
Bean Eaters, right? That's a good one.
Yeah.
Todd asked, did the Spiders ever have more than a one-game winning streak?
Yes, they had a 2-game winning streak. Once.
Careful, spread that out now.
Yeah, they used to say, break up the Yankees.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
The Spiders, they got 2 in a row. As a matter of fact, the Cleveland Papers, when they won 2 games in a row, remember I told you they were against them from the beginning.
Right.
Their sarcastic comment was, they seem to have won 2 games in succession.
They seem to have won.
Right. They didn't even give them credit. They seem to have won.
They seem to have won. There you go.
The papers were brutal, at least in the book.
The papers were brutal.
Steve Tower says he sent in an order and the email sent, so he's looking forward to reading and adding a signed copy to his book collection. So look for an email from Steve Tower. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Steve.
Let's see here. Where's the other one here? Yeah, Bears then put this in. $5 back then was like $173 today. And someone else put $2,000 in 1899 would be $69,000. So just give you an idea on salaries, I guess. So
that's more than I make in a week.
Yeah. So some of the guys weren't paid all that bad, I guess.
They were actually paid, like I said, compared to the average salary man, which worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, including Saturday. That's a 72-hour week by my calculation.
Yeah. I see.
And remember, they're only appearing, half of the year, plus just a few hours a day. So they're fat cats in baseball. I mean, they're making good money. Unfortunately, they're drinking it all away at night.
Ben writes in, he discovered the Spiders when he downloaded NPNG Plus, which is a baseball game, a few months back and randomly chose 1899. The romance of the Spiders stories is exactly why I love gaming. So there's a lot of people that like to play that 1899 season for the Spiders and for other things. So that's really kind of cool there. See if there's any things that some of these we've already asked, so I don't want to ask them again twice. I think we asked how much do they charge to enter the park for a game. I think we already covered that, 50 cents. Yep. And let me see.
Not the wrapper.
And 50 cents in 1899 is $17.32. So $17.32 to get into a game back then. That is not too bad. Not too bad at all.
I love those calculations by whoever's doing them. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yep. And the Orphans from Bears Den 07. The Orphans got their name because Cap Anson was fired, and he was known as Pop Anson. Chicago lost their pop.
Very good. Very good.
That is really kind of neat.
That's great.
Here's a good question from Todd. Has any memorabilia survived from that team?
Well, the easy answer is no. I was at the Hall of Fame last weekend for the 19th Century Committee of the Sabre Group. I looked far and wide for any memorabilia. There is none that I could see. I will say this, though. Unfortunately, there was a company in Cooperstown called the Cooperstown Ball Cap Company, which is no longer in existence, but they would actually make, with original materials, caps from any team you wanted anywhere on the planet. You name the team, they're going to do the research, or you send them information, and they will make a cap. And at one time, I was really curious about getting a Spiders cap made. It was a one-man operation at that time. This was probably in the 90s, the 1990s, that is. And I never set my money in, but I think it was like $40 at that time. So it was not a cheap thing to do. But I wish that company was still around, because this would be a good time to get an official or an unofficial, retro, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Spiders cap.
I did read that the Spiders wore the old St. Louis jerseys, and the St. Louis stitching was still on the jersey.
Correct.
So
you talk about, they literally ripped off the. It's sad. I mean, everything about it is sad.
Okay. Question from Steve here, who ordered the book. Was there any organized effort to reuse the Spiders name this past year when Cleveland changed to the Guardians?
Okay. The answer to that is, I don't know if the word is organized, but there were people talking about the Cleveland Spiders. Yes. And I was following those conversations on, Facebook and other media, and there were people that were floating the name Spiders.
Okay. It would have been cool if it was Spiders. It really would have been something else. Yep. But I don't think they wanted to curse themselves anymore. Cleveland has had a tough go. They really have. Question from John. This is a really, really good question here. Who was the last living 1899 Cleveland Spider, and did any of them have any... Was that?
I got the answer, and it's the same answer for both questions.
And did any of them have an interesting career after baseball?
Yes. Okay. Are you ready for this?
We're ready.
From Maryland in 1961, the last remaining Cleveland Spider died. His name was Harry Cauliflower. I'm not making that up. He was a pitcher, He won his first major league game, and then he lost the last 11, and he never pitched again in the major leagues. Now, what did Harry Cauliflower do after he retired from baseball? He was actually a participant in the YMCA. He was an umpire for a while in the National League. He umpired a few years in the National League. But this is the thing that really made him quite popular. There was a gentleman at that same period of time who was much more famous and much more well-known. His name was D. Wolf Hopper. Mr. Hopper went on stage numerous times, I think thousands of times, and recited Casey at the Bat.
Okay.
And I mean, if you read the newspapers of that time, you will see D. Wolf Hopper. D. Wolf Hopper was in Boston, was in Cleveland, was in Pensacola. Who knows? He was reciting Casey at the Bat from memory. And there are actual recordings of this, believe it or not, like old Vitaphone, like Thomas Edison recordings of him reciting this poem. Yes. Harry Cauliflower did the same thing. I don't know if he recorded it, but he also did the Casey at the Bat recitations.
That's cool.
For fun and profit.
For fun and profit.
Probably more for fun.
So, what? Go ahead, Ron.
Oh, by the way, and Harry Cauliflower's nickname, according to the really, really nasty Cleveland papers, was, of course, the pitching vegetable.
They were brutal. Oh, my gosh, they were brutal.
Why did I have cheddar stuck in my head, but that fits?
The
pitching vegetable. There you go.
You got to love it. You got to love it.
What did you learn or enjoy most about this? You've talked a little bit about, being on the 19th Century Committee for SABR after that. I mean, did it spike more interest in you for that era of baseball? I mean, what did you get out of it besides, satisfying your own intrigue about this team?
Well, what I got out of it was the second book, actually, with the Chris Munger book. He is directly or indirectly involved because his team, the St. Louis team, was basically sold for a song to Mr. Robeson, and it occurred on the St. Louis courthouse steps for $33,000 in February or March of '99. And as it turned out, after I was reading, all of that information, I decided to write a biography of Van der Aa, and that book was selected as the Baseball Book of the Year. It was a finalist for the Seymour Medal, which is named after baseball's first historical document, really history book by Harold Seymour and his wife, Dorothy, and they both since passed. Mm-hmm. But I was a finalist, and I actually went to Cleveland to almost win the award, but I didn't win.
Okay.
But I was in the top 5, so that's a good thing.
That's good. Todd asks, what became of Tommy Tucker?
I'd like to say he was found face down in a ditch, but that would probably be too kind. No, actually, one of their other players was found face down in a ditch, and his name was Louis Sockalexis, and the Cleveland Indians are named after the first Native American baseball player who went to Notre Dame and was, he's promptly thrown out of everywhere he went because he had a predilection to drink excessively. But he was a tremendous athlete in his day. In 1897, look up his records. He literally tore the league up for 2 or 3 months. And, they had to get rid of him because he just could not sustain a healthy lifestyle. And, I think he ended up playing 7 games for the 99 Spiders, and that was it. And they found him with newspaper clippings from his baseball highlights on his person.
Oh,
they found his corpse.
That's so sad.
In 1913. The Cleveland papers had a contest. I think with the Plain Dealer had a contest to rename the Cleveland team. They were called the Naps, after Napoleon Lajoie. And I'm still trying to figure out how to pronounce his last name. I think it's Lajoie. But he ended up, the name Indians was chosen to honor Sauk Alexis.
That's very interesting.
Great story. Very tragic story. Athlete dying young.
Yeah, that's terrible. Steve Tower, another question. What is the next book you're working on?
I'm not letting that out just yet.
Oh, you got to give us a little tidbit. You got to give us a nugget.
Well, Dave, you're really going to like this. I'll tell you offline because this one would really, really please you personally.
All right. Okay. Is it baseball?
It is baseball.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So there is another baseball book coming. So
there is another baseball book.
Okay.
So if you compare, how do the Spiders compare? The 62 Mets, the Tigers team that lost 120, this year's Reds, the 88 Orioles, who were the impetus for you writing this book. How do any common threads to that, or was this just such a sad sack of a thing that it really just is the worst team of all time? Because there's been some terrible teams in baseball history.
There have been, and you mentioned quite a few of them, but there's others, of course. The 1904 Washington Senators lost a whole bunch of ball games. One of the Connie Mack athletics teams, after they were broken up. And
they were a roller coaster for a long time.
They were really, really bad. They were stinky. I forget what year it was that they, just lost a million games. The connecting thread, I'm going to give you some connecting threads here. I think I have it written down here.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention
this is the connecting thread.
28 Sox lost 104 or something like that.
It applies to all of these teams.
Right.
They're the worst ball players ever put on a diamond together. Has-beens, never-weres, players finishing careers, starting careers, in the middle of bad careers. And, they all had really, really remarkably bad pitching staffs. That's always a thread for bad baseball teams. The Cleveland Spiders pitching earned run average that year, I believe, was 6.37,
yes,
which is pretty bad.
They gave up 8.1 runs a game. We looked it up on Baseball Reference.
Like right, because of the errors and things like that.
Right.
They scored 529 runs. This is for the nerds out there. 529 runs in 154 games, and they gave up 1252. That's really bad.
That's terrible.
Under any circumstance, that's really bad. Their home record was 9-32, and their road record was 11-102.
Oh man, that's
Think
bad.
about that. They had 6,000 fans for their 41 dates. Lave Cross started off as the manager. He was 8-30, and he went to St. Louis because he was hitting too well. And they were then managed by Joe Quinn, who was an undertaker in the off season.
How fitting!
That's true.
How fitting!
He's the first Australian-born major leaguer. And his record, and by the way, this is a record, and we'll stand for all time. I don't care who tries to beat it. His record was 12-104 as a manager. So basically, 10 out of every 11 he lost, something like that. They had 24-game loss streak, and that's when they went into Washington, and or maybe they were in Cleveland. I forget. I think they came back to Cleveland for like 3 games in August, and that's when Jim Duncan hit his famous, hit it into the crowd, roll it into the crowd if you have to, home run. And that is, some of the things there. They just had so many amazing stats. They lost 40 of their last 41 to end the year, and the last game they played, the last day of the season, Quinn went around to the pitchers. They had to play a doubleheader against the Reds in Cincinnati. Quinn went around. He got a pitcher for the first game. He could not get a pitcher for the second game. Nobody wanted to pitch. He was desperate. They needed a pitcher, anybody. And by then they were long done with this team. They were thinking about winners somehow. They wanted to get on with it, get some money, go back to their families. And Quinn found a 19-year-old cigar store clerk in Cincinnati in the hotel. His name was Eddie Cobb. He was hired. He pitched one game in the major leagues, and he lost 19-3. That's his career. That's it. So if you look under Eddie Cobb, by the way, it's spelled Kolb, pronounced Cobb. His earned run average is 19.00. I think all those runs were earned.
Oh, that's tough.
Not a great record.
I'm going back to sell cigars.
It's 19. You got to pitch in the majors.
Yeah, majors.
Hey, question
He
from
later owned minor league teams. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Tom asked, did they have player managers back then?
Yes, they did have player managers back then. Joe Quinn was the player manager. He played second base, and he went and managed the team.
Yep.
And they also had Cap Anson was a player manager for quite some time. There were several others. There were several others on other teams that were player managers. It was a relatively common thing in those days.
VL asks, any Phillies team before the 70s, and we're talking about bad teams, except for 1950. And I will add that in 1883, the Philadelphia Quakers was 17-81. So there's another bad team to add to things.
At the old Baker Bowl in Philadelphia, there was an ad for Lifebuoy soap, a big billboard in right field.
Nice.
And the tagline, the sales line was the Phillies use Lifebuoy, and someone got up and graffitied it one night and wrote, "And they still stink."
So the Quakers are another bad Philadelphia team. I think I'll have to find.
If you're going to talk about bad Philadelphia teams, and I'm not trying to beat up on the Philadelphia teams, but in 1961, they lost 23 straight games in that season. That's not the record, but they lost 23 in that year. And then I think in 1964, I believe they had an 8-game lead with 10 to play.
Yep.
And blew the pennant to the Cardinals.
Oh.
I just picked up a book from a gentleman named Bob Tiemann this weekend. And his book is called The 64 Cardinals. He is from St. Louis, and he's bound to talk about that Philly collapse in that book.
Yeah, don't ask anybody from the 86 Angels about Gene Mauch, because they won't have anything good to say.
Well, he was known for his pitching changes and for his bad decisions.
Yes, it's Mauch, the manager of both the 64 Phillies and the 86 Angels. And
Steve asked about the 1998 Marlins. Would that be considered another bad team?
Oh, it was a fire sale after that World Series.
Right.
I don't remember how bad they were, but they were the defending world champions.
They were bad, but I mean, again, nobody's 62 Mets bad or Spiders bad. I mean, if you look at the Mets from 62, when Casey Stengel say, we've got 3 catchers and none of them can catch, stuff like that. And all of the craziness that went on with Marv Throneberry and, those players. But, that team won 40 games. 40 and 120. The Spiders only won 20.
Right. So
they only won half of the games of the Mets.
What happened to the Spiders after 1899? I know Cleveland was a founding member of the American League in 1901. That was it? That was it? Yeah, we're getting the throat slash.
Guys from the National League, and that's when the National League went to an 8-team league. 4 teams were decimated after 99 because they were considered unwieldy. The Spiders, the Washington Senators, who knew, right? The Louisville Colonels, and the Baltimore Orioles were all excised from the National League. And they became the 8-team league, and the American League came in 1901.
1901, yeah.
They were that league for 8-team leagues for the next 60 years. Oh, wow. And I got to tell you, those 60 years, when each team played each other 22 times, 154 games, 7 opposition teams times 22 equals 154. The schedules were perfect. None of this nonsense they have today, interleague play and unbalanced schedules and all this other stuff. Back then, it was pure. It was real. You knew when you went into Philly, you're going to play a 4-game series, and so on and so on. And that's the way it worked. And it worked great for 60 years. And then everything got bollocksed up after that with the 162-game season and the Roger Maris. Well, actually, it was Roger Maris, with the Astros, all that type of stuff after 1960. With the home run record.
So we've talked a lot of things today. Is there a funny story that we haven't talked about today that you'd like to tell us? Because the last time we talked offline, you had a lot of great stuff that was very interesting. Is there something we haven't talked about today? Is there a story here you could tell us real quick about either 1890 or back and then in baseball that would be interesting?
Well, I just, we've said some of these. Others are in the book. I want to say some things about the players and the way the players approached things from the beginning of the season. Remember, the newspaper said they asked that the spectators use no firearms. That's how bad they were. That's pretty bad. That's a pretty bad comment. But also, this was something that I found out later. I didn't know what it meant at the time. But the players would say things like they were afraid of a hen fruit reception. Any guesses on that?
Yeah, it's like in the 34 series, throwing fruit at the players, right?
No.
Okay.
Well, hen fruit reception.
Oh, eggs. They would get egged.
Oh, no.
You're afraid of getting egged.
It's cabbage night every day at the ballpark.
It's dozen egg night.
Right.
And for the first 50 to go through the turnstiles.
Lexicography or whatever you call it to try to figure out. There's lots of language, too, that was really fascinating about what was going on in 1899 in that time frame and how the reporters even reported baseball games. They used flowery language. Sometimes they went into Shakespeare. Just all kinds of crazy, humorous things that we would never even know what they were talking about today. But that was typical, and it lasted up until about 1900, and then it started to change where the sports editor said, we want the basics. Just tell us the facts. We don't need all this extraneous stuff. And by the way, at that time, they were also reporting heavily on the personal lives of the players as well.
Oh, wow.
So they basically had within the sports pages, they had a National Enquirer component, if you want to think about that.
Oh, wow.
So, and yes, that was a thing. So-and-so's on a bender. Oh, well, he's got malaria. We can't deal with him. He'll be back in a week, something like that. They were talking a lot about that.
There's something the book touched on a little bit, and I'm not very good with my U.S. history here, but so we're talking 1899. I think the furthest west team might have been Louisville, I think.
St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Okay.
St. Louis.
How far away from the, quote, Wild West was 1899, and how much did they have to worry about that stuff?
Not very far away at all. So if you think of the Wild West, basically some of the historians have said the demarcation is around 1900, 1905-ish era. What was happening is when people were going into these Western towns with the saloons and all of that, they noticed that the laws were changing so that firearms were not allowed to be worn on the person. They would have to be dropped off at the sheriff's office. This was a very common thing, and it shows up in a lot of Hollywood movies in that time frame as well. And as a matter of fact, of course, the very famous shootout in the Wyatt Earp shootout, the Earp family and all of that. Wyatt Earp lived until 1926 and gave frequent interviews about, the shootout at the OK Corral. But yeah, the West started to change dramatically when, guns no longer became, de rigueur to carry on your hips. And that was really the start of the end of the Wild West as we know it today.
Right. Another question from Tom here. Were the players really that bad? Maybe so. But were they bad because of the rules of the game or the umpiring not ironed out? I might even add equipment. So were the players that bad, or was it the rules, the equipment, or the umpires?
Well, I think the easy answer was always the players, because the umpires and the equipment went to all the teams in the league. These were really, really bad ball players. If you look up their career statistics, either before or after, you will find some astoundingly inept performers. Crazy Schmidt was a left-handed starting pitcher. I mean, his name was Wilfred, but his nickname was Crazy, and for good reason. He would frequently be drunk and fall off the mound fielding bunts and just fall in his keister, basically, and it would be, the easiest hit you ever saw. He was 7-36 for his career, and he called himself the best left-hander in the league. Now, I don't know how that could be best, but so he, just an example, Jim Huey, their ace of their staff. He started the season really red hot. He was 4-16, and then he lost his last 14 in a row to finish the last guy to lose 30 in a season. Charlie Nepper. They called him Grinning Jim, right? He was always grinning, I guess, because he lost so much. Charlie Nepper, their other starter, was 4-22. Harry Cauliflower, we already talked about him. They had another guy named Harry Maupin. He only appeared like two games, maybe. Kid Carsey was another guy. I mean, he walked like 100 guys in, a very short period of time, struck out 13. There was very few strikeouts, and they didn't have the statistical accuracy that they did today as well. So some of the statistics look like optical illusions, to be honest, especially on the pitching side and on the fielding side. And there is an index in the back of the book that gives all their, I call them sordid statistics. But they were really, really bad ball players. There were a couple of guys that were really good, like Jack Clement and Labe Cross, and Quinn could play some good ball. Tommy Dowd was a pretty decent ball player, but kept finding himself on the most historically bad teams. In a 5, 6, 7-year stretch, he was on like 3 of the worst teams ever. Dick Harley wasn't much of a fielder. I think he made like 38 errors in left field. I want you to think about that.
Oh, my gosh.
In left field.
Yes.
38 errors. The shortstop, Harry Lockhead, made 81 errors at short that year. That's more than half a game.
Oh, at least he was consistent.
So, I mean, you look up and down. Joe Sugden, I'll tell you that story about Joe Sugden, the catcher. Not a terribly developed major league player, but, a guy that participated, and that's saying something. But years and years after his playing career ended, Sugden was allowed to go up to, I guess he was in a college setting or a high school setting, and a young man came up to him and recognized him somehow. Maybe his father said something, but recognized him as a former major league player. And he said, this young man who's probably 17, 18, comes up to Sugden. He says, Mr. Sugden, may I shake your hand? And, of course, Joe Sugden, he's a former catcher. He says, well, sure, son. And they shake hands. And this young man comes back and says, oh, my, because he can feel the crackle in the hands. And he says, oh, Mr. Sugden, those hands indicate you've caught a lot of baseballs. And Joe Sugden says, no, son. Those hands indicate I've missed a lot of baseballs. So,
what were the gloves? The gloves like in 1899?
They were crude. If you think about Bid McPhee, who I think is now in the Hall of Fame, he was a second baseman. He was the first guy to wear gloves full time. And, they thought he was a sissy, just kind of like the NHL when they had the first, goaltender mask. They thought they were sissy. I think it was Jacques Plante, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. You're the hockey guy. I mean, I don't know. But I think it was Jacques Plante. But anyway, gloves were quite crude. You could look at some of the older gloves. Like I said, the catchers would put steak, would put a piece of meat inside the leather, to kind of deaden the pitch ball. And they were pretty crude. The catcher's masks were pretty crude. The equipment all the way around was pretty crude. And, of course, it evolved over time thanks to Spalding and Reach and some of the other people that were involved in the sporting industry.
How hard did a pitcher throw? I mean, no one was hitting 90, were they? I know it's all,
pretty darn hard. There was a guy named Amos Russi who was active in that time frame. He threw very hard. Of course, Walter Johnson came across later, threw extremely hard, and he threw like sidearm, like slung the ball. And look, if you take the speed of the game and the crudeness of the equipment, well, you get a lot of errors and you get a lot of injuries, like these finger injuries and all kinds of body bruises to go along. They would, when they slid into base, they would sometimes get strawberries. That meant that they had like a rash along their bottom side. So it was pretty crude stuff.
Crazy Schmidt. In the book, I read about a pitcher that hated bunts and teams would bunt on him. Was that the guy that didn't like the bunts?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, they would bunt on him because when he would try to come off the mound to field a bunt, he would just fall down on himself because he was drinking so much the night before. And besides, he wasn't a very good athlete at all. And that's not a good formula for, like a Jim Cott who won like 18 Gold Gloves,
Right.
Right. That's not a good formula to be a star athlete. So he was especially taken advantage of by bunting.
Did the catchers have a mask with a bar on it? I imagine they did, right?
They did, but it's much cruder, and it's something that if I could compare it to something, I'm going to say chicken wire. It was pretty crude still. They had a bar they could see out, but it wasn't like these things today, which are these iron, steel, whatever they are, but they're very, very thick. And, they will protect someone's face. These things they had back then, if the ball hits you just right, it might bend those, it might bend that chicken wire back a little.
Because that was 1899, so I was always wondering, why did hockey wait till late 60s for the goalie put on a mask? If baseball had been wearing them for 65 years or so, at least there was something there. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I always wondered why they took so long.
I always thought that hockey had this sort of self, manliness thing built in, especially in the goaltending position. But that's another conversation.
It was. So anyway, we'll be wrapping up shortly. So if you're in the chat room, if you have any more questions for Joseph Hetrick, he has the book here, Misfits, Baseball's Worst Ever Team. And let me put the banners back up. You can get this at Pocol Press, POCOL Press.com. I got the banner up here, POCOL Press.com. And if you email him, Chris and Tom, spell it out, Chris, A-N-D, Tom, at Erols.com, EROLS.com. Send him a note, tell him about the book, and he will inscribe that for you like he did for myself.
If you would list the inscription, I'd be happy to write, what you want. I mean, not a book, of course, but, write if you want, best wishes or whatever, that's fine. But if you want something personal with your name, I can do that too. No problem.
Without giving away what your project next be, what other eras of baseball intrigue you? Obviously, you were a child in the late 60s, early 70s, so that obviously sticks with you. But is there another part of baseball history? Again, I don't want you to give away what you're doing for your next book that intrigues you as much as this.
Yes, it's the dead ball era.
So anything from this till the emergence of Mr. George Ruth.
Correct. This dead ball era is some wild stuff. There are some tremendous books out on it. G.H. Fleming wrote The Unforgettable Season about 1908. A lady named Kate Murphy, C-A-I-T Murphy, wrote Crazy 8 about that same season. Mr. Fleming's book is an older book, but it uses largely the newspaper clippings. Miss Murphy's book, who I saw present this book at a SABR meeting, She has her own narrative. And this was the wildest, greatest pennant race in history for both leagues. One game separated the top three teams in both leagues for the final standings. And in the National League, there was a very unfortunate incident that happened to a guy named Fred Merkel.
I've replayed that game on my channel.
Long story for another time. It's a very well-known story. And the pennant races were just absolutely astounding, right down to the last game of the season.
Richard writes in, Kate Murphy's book is excellent. So he comments on that. Jeff Hunter writes in, highly entertaining. I'll be ordering a signed copy. I do own the 1899 season. Perhaps he will play the Spiders. Jeff's another one of the players in our community, so thank you, Jeff. VL writes in, and don't believe the propaganda about Ty Cobb. I only know Ty Cobb about the spikes and hurting people and being a dirty player. That's what I know about Ty Cobb.
There actually is a Ty Cobb Spiders connection. If you want to hear the story, I'd be
sure. Oh yes,
it is in the book near the end. It involves that same catcher, Joe Sugden.
I think I know where you're going with this. Yeah, that's
so. What happened was Ty Cobb was an extremely unpopular player with the American League.
Yeah,
in 1912. Cobb was being heckled by some fans, probably on the road. I think it was in Philadelphia. Yes, it was in Philadelphia. They were heckling him. Cobb took no guff off no man, ever. He charged into the stands, and he literally beat this guy up within an inch of his life. The president of the American League, Ban Johnson, love that name, banned Ty Cobb indefinitely, saying that, you've got to pay his hospital bills and you've got to say you're sorry. Cobb didn't either. And they went into Philadelphia that next day. The Detroit Tigers went on strike. They had to play a ball game. They had no team. Literally, they had no players. Cobb was out, suspended. All the players en masse went on strike. So what I think it was Huey Jennings was the manager of the Tigers. He went literally around Philadelphia sandlots, recruiting any and all players he could find. And he happened to know that Joe Sugden was still around somewhere. At least he was an actual major league player. Sugden came up and ended up with, I think they put him on first base that day. The so-called Detroit Tigers for one day lost to the Phillies, or the Philadelphia Athletics, 24-2. Well, that could put a little bit of egg on Dan Johnson's face, because he figured, well, we can't have these guys go around and pretend to be the Tigers because we don't have the Detroit Tigers. So he said, Ty, come on back.
That was
back down.
That was 1912.
Back down to no man.
Wow, that's a great story. Richard writes in, isn't the story that Walter Johnson would occasionally go easy on some players when the game was out of hand, except Cobb?
Well, we're talking about another era here now, so we're talking about into the dead ball era and and beyond, and that's not what this book is about. So, but I certainly wouldn't doubt that Walter Johnson, he slung that ball sidearm, and he was reputed to be as fast as anybody. I don't want to. I don't know a whole lot about him and Cobb, but one of the stories about Johnson was a rookie went up to bat against him one time and took 2 strikes, and he started to walk back in the dugout, and the umpire said, son, you got one more. And this young ball player said, I don't want it. So Johnson struck him out on 2 strikes. That's intimidating.
That is great. VL writes in, he says, most of the stories about Cobb were made up by his autobiographer, Al Stump.
Right. There were two books on Cobb that came out at the same time. Al Stump was a sports reporter. They later made a movie called Cobb with Tommy Lee Jones. Many people today say it's complete fiction. He wrote a similar book that was a more standard sports biography at the same time. He put all of the crazy stuff in this one book that is said to be made up, and the good stuff or the regular sports bio in the other book. Of course, the book Cobb sold much, much more because it was colorful and all of this. And of course, now later on, other writers have uncovered more of the Cobb story and believed that he was not that guy that was, talked about so poorly. One of the stories in the book Cobb that, again, this is the same author writing both books at the same time. One of the books, the book Cobb, says that they went out, I think it was to Lake Tahoe one time. The author and Cobb went out, and they were in, a nightclub, and there was entertainment. And this DJ or this, I guess the MC came up and went into the microphone, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very famous player here tonight. It's Tyrus Raymond Cobb." Now, this was, Cobb was still alive, but it was like late 50s era time frame. And, he was at the near the end of his life. And the announcer said, "Mr. Cobb, if you were batting today, what do you think you would hit?" And Cobb didn't waste any time. And he said, "I think I could hit 275. And the guy said, "Wow, that's really great." And Cobb said, "Yeah, but I'm 72 years old." Now, who knows if that's a real story,
right,
but it's certainly a funny story. But anyway, that is in the book Cobb. So, you make up your own mind. Subsequent biographies have painted a much better light for Mr. Cobb.
Right. That story reminds me of Bobby Orr. They asked Bobby Orr a handful of years ago, and they said, "Hey, if you had your Bruins and you played the Stanley Cup champions today, how would you do? What would the score be?" And Bobby Orr said, "We'd win 1-0. And he goes, "Only 1-0? He says, "Yeah, most of us are in our 70s. Same kind of thing. Same kind of thing.
Story. It's the same story.
Do you watch baseball today, or do you have trouble watching baseball today because you're a fan of dead ball?
I really do have trouble, and I've noticed this trouble in the last several years. I got really bummed out about the pandemic. When they started showing these cardboard cutouts as fans, I turned off the entire season. I said, I don't give a care.
It was tough.
I won't use the word, but I don't care about, this is not baseball anymore. Whatever they're doing, it's not baseball. So I stopped. And then I came back last year and I started following the Nationals again. And, they had this big fire sale and I got kind of depressed about that. But, they got their series, so I'm happy for that. But, it is such a weird game when really, if you watch the game and you watch these guys, and I don't want to pick out one guy in particular, but Joey Gallo, I mean, really, does he have a life? He just tries to hit a home run, and he either hits a home run or he strikes out. He strikes out historic amounts of time, and I just don't think that's baseball. I really prefer all the finer points of the game, the place hitting, the stolen base, the hit and run, the, using your skill as fielders, pitching correctly, and not just standing up there and just trying to wail away and hit the ball into the moon. I just think it's nonsensical at this point. So I'm not a big fan of the current state of affairs. And this extra inning ghost runner on second base, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard about in my life. You might as, it's hockey's equivalent of, the so-called shootout. It's the same thing. It's nonsense.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. They made a lot of changes to baseball, with adding that runner there. I think the doubleheaders are 7 innings now.
No, they're 9 innings this year.
Oh, then back to 9.
Okay.
Okay. But they got the National League playing the American League now, and they're trying to speed up the game. I think they're using pitching clocks in some of the other leagues. Do you think, and Ron, this is for you too, being baseball fans, bigger baseball fans than I am, do you think that they really need to do some of these things to keep up with the times and to appeal to the younger audience?
Some of them, yes. Not all of them, but some of them. The pitch clock. It's not that baseball takes too long. There's just too much dead time in between when something happens. And if you get away with it more in football, which also gets longer and longer. I mean, we've talked about this before. I'd hate to be at a football stadium. You get 12 to 13 minutes of actual action, and then the replay boards show you ads for 3 hours in between plays. And so, I really have no desire to see pitchers hit anymore. I'm sure our guest probably would disagree with that. But between that and the pitch clock, yes, I think you need to at least shorten the time between the action. I mean, you still have 27 outs. I'm not real thrilled with the Ghost Runner idea either, but I understand that maybe we could also cap how many pitchers are on an active roster, what might change some of that philosophy as well. But I mean, just like with anything else, I think you try 10 things, and if you get 2 to stick, then you've done something. But some of it's gimmicky. But no, I think we've certainly gotten away from you throw the ball, you get the ball back, you throw the ball back again. That's just my view on it.
What do you think, Joseph?
Well, I was struck when I went to a game a few years ago at Nationals Park, at the new Nationals Park in, I guess it was 2008 when they first built it. And I'm sitting up in the stands, and I'm hearing Black Sabbath music played between batters. And I'm going, Ozzy Osbourne is at Nats Park tonight. I'm going like, what? I mean, that's just a completely different thing. Now, by the way, I am a fan of some hard rock music, but it doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit. And I understand the demographics and all that. They want to get younger fans, but come on, Black Sabbath was recording Iron Man in 1970 or 69. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that's a good fit. Just me, just picking on Ozzy and Tony Iommi and the gang, but I don't like that really piped in loud music. I don't think it has a place in baseball, but it's very, very popular. Apparently, somebody thinks it is.
Yeah. VL writes in, it's not the game, it's TV. TV slows down the game.
Yeah, commercials, just 2:20 between innings for commercials.
Yeah. Let me see. I had another question here, and it was Todd. Todd asked, have you played any kind of tabletop baseball games?
Oh my, Todd, if you only knew. Todd, not only have I played them, I played approximately 7,000 tabletop games, and I've designed my own as well. It is not available commercially, and it may never be available commercially, but I'm in the middle of 19-8 National League. I'm almost at the end of the season. So I am a very seriously, devoted tabletop baseball fan. Have been doing it since about 1970, on and off. Right now it's more on because I'm retired and I don't really have a life other than to talk baseball and roll the dice. I just got my little dice tower, so I'm all excited about that.
What was your first game?
The first game, I played 6 different games, 6 different formats. The first game was called the famous Cadico.
The spinners.
The spinner game. And believe it or not, I have records of all these games. Then I played something called the Gil Hodges Pennant Fever, and now called Everyday Player Baseball.
Okay. Yep.
I played something called Kenneth Hawes Pennant Winner 2, which was this guy in Pennsylvania just basically selling you a bunch of pieces of paper, for $5 or whatever. Pretty interesting game, though. And then I played what I thought at that time was the grand kahuna or whatever, the Sports Illustrated baseball game.
The Avalon Hill, yeah.
Yeah, the Avalon Hill. But before they became Avalon Hill, the Sports Illustrated version of the 1970 and 71 seasons, heavily into that. and 72 for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I played this computer game called SSI, Computer Baseball Strategic.
Mm-hmm.
And I played that for a couple of times because you could literally hit a button and the game would be done, and then it would print the box score. And I thought, well, that's no fun. The fun is in the rolling the dice or whatever and making the strategy moves and all of this stuff, picking your line. I mean, that thing did everything. So it was very, very blasé. And then after all of those games, I used some of what those games I liked and some of what I didn't like, and I invented my own.
Okay.
Which I played for probably close to, I'm going to say, 1,500 games, maybe close to 2,000.
What seasons do you play in your own game?
Well, right now I'm playing the 1908 National League. I will then play the 1908 American League, and then they'll meet in the World Series. But these games are, I've learned from playing all these games to keep more and more and more meticulous stats. Like I keep pitching rotations, I keep injuries, errors made by players. I don't keep the fielding average, just the number of errors. I keep the team records, team versus team. I keep 1-run games, 2-run games, extra inning games, shutouts, home and away records. I keep, the meticulous schedules. I keep, all the scores of all the games and all the stats of all the players. So it's pretty. And then like after every series, I'll play like a 3 or 4 game series. I'll update them. So I have constant rotation of, I know all the stats. I know everything about, sort of the state of the game, if you know what I mean. I mean, I just played a series earlier today, between the Cincinnati Reds and the Phillies, and they're battling for 4th place in 1908, which they actually did. And so far, it's a dead heat with 9 games to play for. So when I play games, unlike you, Dave, I play the entire schedule.
Wow. How long does one game take you to play?
It depends on the game. If they're extra inning games, they'll take longer. But between 15 and 25, 27 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Something like that.
That's pretty good. Okay, so that's okay. That's not.
I'm just like hardcore into these games,
yeah.
And I really, really spend way too much time doing them, but they're fun. Yeah. They're fun for me.
Let's see. Where was was Richard here? We were talking about the pace of the game. So it's the pace of the game that needs to change. Seems like pitch clock is working in the minor leagues. So that's what Ron was talking about, speeding up the game a little bit. So anyway, and David writes in, he says, Sabertooth Baseball has a nice dead ball era card and dice game. So I've heard of Sabertooth Baseball. I haven't played it. I think it's a relatively new game. Could I be wrong with that?
I've read about it, but I don't know much more about it than it. I think Kurt Berglund's talked about it on his channel.
Okay.
I was just going to mention his name. I'm sure Dave knows Kurt Berglund.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
A lot of stuff that's similar to you, what you're doing. Mm-hmm. He does it like for so many of these other baseball games. I mean, I've been watching his channel. That guy, he's pretty hardcore too.
Oh, yes,
he is.
He's probably as hardcore as anybody out there.
He's a good
guy, too. And he's got a good thing going. And if you're into that kind of thing, YouTube's the game for you. I like the idea of playing a game, on, watching a game or playing a game on live. That's pretty unique.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah. What we do in the community is kind of fun. Is it's hard to get it visually pleasing. So what we like to do is we like to play the game, and we're all our own quote broadcasters, and we like to think of it as like a radio call. because there's not a lot to watch. And even when I go to bed at night, I got my phone on, I'll go to YouTube, and I'll listen to someone that's playing a game, and I don't have to watch it. I can just listen, and I feel like I'm at the ballpark, and they describe what happened in the whole bit, and they're flipping the card or rolling the dice. It's just relaxing fun. It's really what it is. It's just a good time.
It's a great solitaire. It sure beats, the solitaire card games with the deck of 52.
Yes, it does. All righty. So once again, we've been talking to J. Thomas Hetrick of the book Misfits, Baseball's Worst Team Ever. If you go over to
team.
Yeah, worst ever team. Yeah. If you go over to www.pocalpress.com, and that's POCOL press.com, you will find this book. In fact, you have 2 baseball books on there, right?
I do. Well, actually, I have like 13 or 14 because this is a company that publishes other baseball books and other books in general.
Okay.
So, we talked a little bit about, commercial time here. We talked a little bit about the colorful language that is being used. There's a whole book on this written about between 1860 and 1900. That was the era where they used the colorful language. The book is called The Lost Art of Baseball Humor, and it is a laugh riot. I mean, not only is the book funny, but there are, hundreds of line art illustrations from the period newspapers of the day. It's a pretty interesting book. It's the only book of its kind out there. So we publish a lot of books in fiction, the fiction and the nonfiction category.
Oh, fantastic!
Look under when you go to that Pocal Press. There's a little thing on the side that will say books for sale, and then when you click into that, there's the genres. We have 6 genres. You click into the baseball, you'll see all the baseball titles.
And again, if you email Chris and Tom at Errols.com, to spell that out, Chris, A-N-D, Tom, at Errols.com, E-R-O-L-S.com. Tell him you bought the book. Tell him you like it inscribed, and he will do that for you as well. So people just saying again, Ben, awesome show. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Ben. Steeler fan, thank you so much. Steeler fan's the one, Joseph, when I play the Spiders games and I have my fake sponsors, it's Steeler fan buggy whips is what we have here. So I started making up some like, it's Uncle Ron Snake Oil is another sponsor.
I loved it. I don't know where it came from, but it was awful funny.
We just have a good time with it. So Steeler fan has the buggy whip, and he's got, and I forget who it was, is when one of the team wins, they play the fiddle downtown, and we have a whole thing going about when the Spiders lose, the other team plays the fiddle downtown, and at the local brothel they have a free drink or something like that. We just have a good time with it.
It was just coming into vogue, and of course the old story about one of the Fast Negro Leagues players was he could go into a room, turn out the light, and be in bed before it went out. That kind of thing. That's a pretty fast guy. But electric lights, you could take off on that because electric lights were actually very dangerous back in the day.
Oh, wow.
They didn't have all of the, all the safety features that we have today. And there were people that would turn on a light in their house and either get electrocuted or some other injury would befall them because of the wiring wasn't good, and it wasn't ready for prime time. So think about that. Do some research and think about that. The electric light was really fun.
Yeah.
Maybe not so fun.
I actually went back and I read on somewhere, I was like, what are some of the new products in 1898 and 1899? And Pepsi Cola was one of the new products. There was Palmolive was a new product. There was a fountain pen company. So I just had all these real products that were my sponsors for the show. It just there was some oven company that had a new stove out, and all these things were real products that except for the Steeler fan buggy whips and Uncle Ron snake oil. But Uncle Ron needs to come up with a new snake oil now, something that'll cure everything.
Well, let me tell you about my new malaria contraption.
The malaria contraption. Richard, thank you so much. All these stories are great. Thank you so much for coming on. Joseph says, Richard, thank you so much. And here it is right here. Steeler fan buggy whips in the corner of...
Charles Ingalls.
It's on the corner of Main and... Oh, boy, I forget the other street now.
Charles out in Walnut Grove. I hear he has a little house out in the prairie.
Yep, my neighbor Charles Ingalls
keeps writing about these things.
Plays the fiddle when Cincinnati beats the Spiders, so he has the fiddle player downtown. So we have a good time with that. So anyway, all righty. Hey, Joseph, really, thanks for coming on the show. It was fun talking baseball with you. This book was fantastic. I like how it has an introduction, and then it goes day by day with the Spiders, and you really learn when you read this book why they only got 20 wins. It's not that they started the year and just were bad. It's just so many things happened to them that made it impossible for them. After reading this and everything that happened, I'm surprised they even won 20. It was that bad back then. And so
they were trying to avoid mass suicide by the end of the season. You know?
Yeah, I'm surprised they finished out the season because they weren't playing at home. Nobody wanted to see them. The papers were roasting them. It was just bad. In fact, it makes me want to go back now and see if I can find some of the articles on it, because I know you put a lot in the book, but I'd love to go read some more on this, because I'm really enjoying playing my season in the baseball games that I'm doing, and reading the book is just. We did a whole
personality to the.
It does, and we did a whole show. I think a couple weeks ago on researching your baseball project, and one of the things is finding a book or finding an almanac, and you're playing in a season and read about it. And so when I play these games and I see Tucker on first base and I see Quinney on second base and Sugden out there and Crazy Schmidt, I now have a better idea who they are and a better respect for what's going on. And I really, even the other teams, I'm learning some of the guys on Louisville, because they play Louisville a lot, and St. Louis, and Lave Cross is about to get traded to St. Louis, where I am in the season now. And This book has really just, I actually stopped playing the game so I could read the book, because I want to catch up to where I am so I can follow along, because so many things happened, and it's really, really been fun. So we want to thank you for coming on to the show, and we will have this has been live tonight on YouTube and Facebook, but we will take the transcripts of this or the audio from this, and we will turn this into a podcast this week. So there'll be an audio version for everybody here. It's probably one of our longest audio shows, but we will have that in its entirety as well, up on Spreaker and iTunes and all the other places where you hear our podcast. Probably in the next day or two, we'll get it all edited and get it up there. But anyway, so we want to thank you again one more time. The book is called Misfits, Baseball's Worst Ever Team by J. Thomas Hetrick, and you can find that. You can find it on Amazon, but I suggest go to Pocal Press, POCOL Press.com. Go there, buy the book direct from him there. Send him an email and have him inscribe your book, and enjoy the Spiders. And he's got another book there as well, so make sure you get that one. And he's got a new one that he's not going to talk to us about, but he will have another one coming up soon. And when you get that one there, we have to have exclusive rights to have you back here on the show when that one comes out.
Like I said, Dave, it's a Dave special. So it's right up your alley.
All right, I hope so. And before we go, Bears Den writes in and says, Uncle Ron's elixir is now in cherry flavor. So
I'll get some right away.
Tonic water to help with that malaria. Wink, wink, wink.
All right. Hey, Joseph, we're going to sign off. Stay right here, though. We're going to sign off live, but stay here with us for one more second. We'll talk to you offline for a minute before we go. And everybody that tuned in tonight on YouTube and Facebook, that tuned in live, that gave us questions, thank you so much. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you so much. This was a real fun time here, and we hope to have him back at another time. So I'm Dave. And Ron and Joseph here. Thank you for joining us here on the Digital Dice Podcast. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, by the numbers. This has been Digital Dice episode 134. And Ron, boy, that was a good interview.
Wasn't it?
That was a lot of fun.
All sorts of good stories.
That one about hitting the ball over the fence for a home run was such a no-no back then. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought hitting the ball like as far as you could was frowned on?
It wasn't gentlemanly. I just find that amazing.
You know, that's a good way of putting it, because back then there was the whole gentlemanly way of life, you know, and maybe that was it, you know.
You know, I mean, they're talking about, you know, betting during the games and getting into arguments with the games and throwing glasses of, you know, empty beer glasses to the umpires, but hitting a home run, that was sissified. I just can't believe that. That's just there. And, you know, but, you know, it was George Herman Ruth that kind of changed everything, and no one was going to go to the Babe and said, "You sissy," more than once anyway.
It was a long time ago, very different times, and a lot was learned in that.
It was. I think the moment for me is when he was talking about the last game of this last day of the season, the doubleheader, and they're trying to find some poor scrub to throw. And he makes the point about, you know, after all that losing and being on the road for months, how they're kind of drink themselves half blind every night, and just kind of they had to have been so demoralized by the end of that, because after this they got to go home and do whatever it is they do in the off season, not knowing what's going to happen. I found that, I guess for a lack of a better word, quite sobering. It's like, because you've lived this vagabond life for so long, and again, what he said, they lost 40 of their last 41.
Yeah, it was something ridiculous like that.
Oh, my goodness. So that's what I found to be the most interesting. At that point, it's just not fun in games anymore. It's about, mental survival.
Yeah. Yeah, it must have taken its toll on these guys, knowing that if you played well, you were out. You went to the other team and just...
That you were so bad that you would get the 10 days notice that your major league career was over. Because if you couldn't play for the Cleveland Spiders, you weren't getting picked up by Pittsburgh or the Giants or anything like that. You were, House of David barnstorming for you.
Yeah, it was very different. So, listeners of the show, we want to know what you think of that interview. What was your favorite part? What thing did you learn? What was kind of really crazy? You know, there was a lot of crazy stories they told, so we want to know what you thought about that. And again, if you want to get the book, you can get it on Amazon, but you're better off, helping out the author and going to Polcol Press, and that's www.polpress.com, polcolpress.com, and send them an email, Chris and Tom at Errols.com. That's Chris, ANDTOM, Chris and Tom, at Errols, and Errols is EROLS.com. Chris and Tom at Errols.com, and they will inscribe the book. Tell them you heard it on Digital to Dice. They'll tell them that you heard him on Digital to Dice, and let them know what you thought about the interview. But anyway, again, ways to get a hold of us. DigitalToDice.com is the website. 978-751-DICE is the text line. DigitalToDice@yahoo.com is our email, and on Facebook, facebook.com/groups/digitaldice. The 3 stars will be back next week. We had such a long show this week that we're not going to do the 3 stars, so the 3 stars will be back next week. In fact, we might even throw in a bonus 4th star next week to make up for it.
Texaco Super Chief Star.
That's a good way of putting it there. So, it's all right. So I'm Dave.
I'm Ron.
We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye-bye.